Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this impromptu new way of narrating. It's called the Uncut version. This is in response to all the load shedding we have and hours and hours without power, which, makes recording and editing very difficult. So, I bought a new phone with a big battery. It's actually more of a battery with a phone attached than a big battery. And, it's got night vision, as you can see. Look, night vision. So it means I can read books in the dark, as long as I've got the physical book. So, for when there is no power, this will enable me to still produce videos for you guys. And this is going to be an uncut series, so it's almost like a live reading, except it's not going to be a live stream. I'm going to record the story, the chapter, and then you can have your legitimate scrolling text. As you can see, you could read the book, as long as I can zoom in a little bit. There we go. So, there we go. We got my old table underneath here, and we got a book, and I'll read it live without any editing, because, well, the only thing that's going to have power will be my phone, really. But, like I said, it enables me to do some content. So there might be a bit of rambling, there's going to be some stumbling over words, but hopefully this will be a bit more personable than my normal videos. The audio quality would be okay, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully you guys understand. Anyway, onto this book. This is the best of Harry Harrelson, and you'll be wondering, who's Harry Harrelson? Well, he's somewhat important to our community because he coined the term Deathworld in a series of books called, strangely enough, Deathworld. Come on. Okay, that says Deathworld. This is the third book in the series, trilogy. There we go, Deathworld 3. And he did 1 and 2 in 1960-something. Early 60s. So that brought him into my radar. I wanted to get book 1 and 2, obviously, to read to you guys. But those are still on order. I found number 3 in a bookstore, and then I also found this one, which is the best works of Harry Harrison. So we're going to go through this, and then hopefully when I get my Deathworld anthology or Deathworld trilogy book, we can start reading that. And yeah. So I might put in some comments. It's not going to be much, or it's not going to be any editing. I'm not going to be swearing, but I don't see too much swear words happening in this story. This does say short stories, but that is book short stories, not internet short stories. So they're still fairly long. Yeah. If you like, you do the usual YouTube stuff. Like, subscribe, blah, 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 share, comment. Yeah, live reading, here we go. With all the stumbling and mistakes with that. So hopefully you guys understand, and yeah. I'm reading it off the screen, not the book, because there's a phone in the way. It makes it very difficult to read when there's a phone in the way. Let me just zoom in a touch. There we go. Nice and clear, and you can see my podgy finger. The streets of Ashkelon. Somewhere above, hidden by the eternal clouds of Wesker's world, a thunder rumbled and grew. Trader John Garth stopped when he heard it, his boots sinking slowly into this muck and cupped by his good ear to catch the sound. It swelled and waned in the thick atmosphere, growing louder. That noise is the same as the noise of your skyship, Itten said, with a stolid Wesker slowly pulverizing the idea in his mind and turning over the bits one by one for closer examination. But your ship is still sitting where you landed it. It must be, even though we cannot see it, because you are the only one who can operate it. And even if any of you are the only, if anyone else could operate it, we would have heard it rising into the sky. Since we did not, and it is the sound in the skyship sound, then it must mean, yes, another ship, Garth said, too absorbed in his own thoughts to wait for the laborious Weskerian chains of logic to clank their way through to the end. Of course, it was other spacer. It had been only a matter of time before one appeared, and undoubtedly this one was homing on the SS radar reflector as he had done. His own ship would show up clearly on the newcomer's screen, and they would probably sit down as close to it as they could. "You better go ahead, Itten," he said, using the water so... No. Move fun over a bit. There we go. And what was that? "So you can get to the village quickly. Tell everyone to get back into the swamps. We'll clear the hard ground. That ship is landing on instruments, and anyone underneath it will touch down is going to be cooked." This immediate threat was clear enough to the little Wesker amphibian. Before Garth finished speaking, Iton's ribbed ears had folded like a bat's wing, and he slipped silently into the nearby canal. Garth squelched through the mud, making as good time as he could over the clinging surface. He had just reached the fringes of the village, clearing when... Is that record button in the way? He had just reached the fringes of the village clearing when the rumbling grew to a head-splitting roar, and the spacer broke through the low-hanging layer of clouds above. Garth shield... Thank you, phone, I know. Garth shielded his eyes from the down-reaching tongue of flame and examined the growing form of the grey-black ship with mixed feelings. After almost a standard year on Wesker's world, he had to fight down the longing for human companionship of any kind. While this buried fragment of herd spirit, chatted for the rest of the monkey tribe, his trader's mind was busily drawing a line under the column of figures and adding up the total. This could very well be another trader's ship, and if this was, his monopoly in Wesker's trade was at an end. Then again, this might not be a trader at all, which was the reason he stayed in the shelter of the giant fern and loosened his gun from its holster. The ship baked dry 100 square meters of mud. The roaring blast died, and the landing feet crunched down through the crackling crust. Metal cracked and settled into place, while the cloud of smoke and steam slowly drifted lower in the humid air. "Garth, you native cheating extortionist! Where are you?" The ship's speaker boomed. The lines of the spacer had looked only slightly familiar, but there was no mistaking the rasping tones of that voice. Garth wore a smile when he stepped out onto the open and whistled shrilly through 2 fingers. A directional microphone ground out of the casing on the ship's fin and turned in his direction. "What are you doing here, Singh?" he shouted towards the mic. "Too crooked to find a planet of your own and have to come here to steal an honest trader's profits." "Honest?" the amplified voice roared. "This is from a man who has been in more jails than cat houses, and that's a godly number in itself. I do declare, sorry friend, of my youth, but I cannot join you in your exploiting of the aboriginal pest hole. I am on course to a more fairly atmosphered world where a fortune is waiting to be made. I only stopped here since an opportunity presented to turn an honest credit by running a taxi service. I bring you a friendship, the perfect companionship, a man in a different line of business who might help you in yours. I'd come out and say hello myself, except I would have to decon and for biologicals. I'm cycling the passenger through the lock, so I hope you won't mind helping him with his luggage." At least there would be no other trader on the planet now. That worry was gone, but Garth still wondered what sort of passenger would be taking a one-way passage to an uninhabited world, and what was behind that concealed hint of merriment in Singh's voice. He walked around to the far side of the spacer where the ramp had dropped and looked up at the man in the cargo lock, who was wrestling ineffectually with a large crate. The man turned towards him, and Garth saw the clerical dog collar, and he knew just what Singh was about, chuckling. The man turned towards him, and Garth saw the clerical dog collar, and knew just what it was Singh had been chuckling about. "What are you doing here?" Garth asked. In spite of his attempt at self-control, he snapped the words. If the man noticed this, he ignored it, because he was still smiling and putting out his hand as he came down the ramp. "Frank Mark," he said, "of the Missionary Society of Brothers, I am very pleased to—" "I said, what are you doing here?" Garth's voice was under control now, quiet and cold. He knew what had to be done, and it must be done quickly, or not at all. "That should be obvious," Father Mark said, with a good nature still unruffled. "Our missionary society has received funds to send spiritual emissaries to alien worlds for the first time. I was lucky enough. Take your luggage and get back into the ship. You're not wanted here and have no permission to land. You'll be a liability, and there is no one on Wrestler to take care of you. Get back on the ship." "I do not know who you are, sir, or why you are lying to me," the priest said. He was still calm, but the smile was gone. "But I have studied the galactic law and the history of this planet very well. There are no diseases or beasts here that I should have any particular fear of. It is also an open planet, and until the space survey changes that status, I have as much right to be here as you do." The man was, of course, right, but Garth couldn't let him know that. He had been bluffing, hoping that the priest didn't know his rights. But he did. There was only one distasteful course left for him, and he had better do it while there was still time. "Get back on the ship," he shouted, not hiding his anger now. With a smooth motion of his gun was out of the holster and the pitted black muzzle only inches from the priest's stomach. The man's face turned white, but he did not move. "What the hell are you doing, Garth?" Singh's voice echoed out there. Singh's shocked voice grated from the speaker. "That guy paid his fare, and you gave no rights at all to throw him off the planet." "I have this," Garth said, raising the gun, and sighting between the priest's eyes. "I give him 30 seconds to get back on board the ship. I give him 30 seconds to get back aboard the ship, or I pull the trigger." "Well, I think you were either off your head or playing a joke," Singh's exasperated voice rasped down at them. "If a joke is bad taste, and either way you're not getting away with it. Two can play that game, only I can play it better." There was a rumble of heavy bearings on the remote-controlled 4-gun turret on the ship's side rotated and pointed at Garth. "Now, down gun and give Father Mark a hand with the luggage," the speaker commanded, a trace of humor back in the voice now. "As much as I would like to help, old friend, I cannot. I feel it is time you had a chance to talk to the Father. After all, I've had the opportunity of speaking with him all the way from Earth." Garth jammed the gun back into the holster with an acute feeling of loss. Father Mark stepped forward, the winning smile back now and the Bible taken from his pocket of his robe. In his raised hand, "My son," he said. "I'm not your son," was all Garth could choke out as the defeat welled up in him. His fist drew back as the anger rose, and his best he could do was open the fist so that it struck only with the flat of his hand. Still, the blow sent the priest crashing into the ground, and fluttering the pages of the book splattered into the thick mud. Aiton and the other Weskers had watched everything with a seemingly emotionless interest, and Garth made no attempt to answer their unspoken questions. He stared towards his house, but turned back when he saw that they were still unmoving. "A new man has come," he told them. He will need help with these things he is brought. If he doesn't have any place for them, you can put them in the big warehouse until he has a place of his own." He watched them waddle across the clearing towards the ship, then went inside and gained a certain satisfaction from slamming the door hard enough to crack one of the panes. There was an equal amount of painful pleasure in breaking out one of the remaining bottles of Irish whiskey that he had been saving for a special occasion. Well, this was special enough, though not really what he had in mind. The whiskey was good and burned away some of the bad taste in his mouth, but not all of it. If his tactics had worked, success would have justified everything, but he had failed. In addition to the pain of failure, there was the acute feeling that he had made a horse's ass out of himself. Singh had blasted off without any goodbyes. There was no telling what sense he had made of the whole matter, though he would surely carry some strange stories back to the trader's lodge. Well, that could be worried about the next time Garth signed in. Right now, he had to go about setting things right with the missionary. Squinting out through the rain, he saw the man struggling to erect his collapsible tent, while the entire population of the village stood in ordered ranks and watched. Naturally, none of them offered help. By the time the tent was up and the crates and boxes stowed inside the rain had stopped, the level of fluid in the bottle was a good bit lower, and Garth felt more like facing up to the unavoidable meeting. In truth, he was looking forward to talking with the man. This whole nasty business aside, after an entire solitary year, any human companionship looked good. "Will you join me now for dinner, John Garth?" he wrote on the back of an old invoice, but maybe the guy was too frightened to come, which was no way to start any kind of relationship. Rummaging under the bunk, he found a box that was big enough to put his pistol inside. Iton was of course waiting outside the door when he opened it, since this was his tour of knowledge collector. He handed him the note and the box. "Would you take this to the new man?" he said. "Is the new man's name Newman?" Iton asked. "No, it is not," Garth snapped. "His name is Mark, but I am only asking you to deliver this, not get involved in conversation." As always, when he lost his temper, the literal-minded Weskers won the round. "You are not asking for conversation," Iton said slowly, "but Mark may ask for conversation, and others will ask me his name. And if I do not know his name..." The voice cut off as Garth slammed the door. This didn't work in the long run either, because next time he saw Iton, a day, a week, or even a month later, the monologue would be picked up on the very word it had ended, and the thought rambled out at its last frayed end. Garth cursed under his breath and poured water over the pair of tastier concentrates. There we go. A pair of tastier concentrates that he had left. "Come in," he said, when there was a quiet knock on the door. The priest entered, and he held out the box with the gun. "Thank you for the loan, Mr. Garth. I appreciate the spirit that made you send it. I have no idea what caused the unhappy affair when I landed, but I think I would be best forgotten if we were going to be on this planet together for any length of time." "Drink?" Garth asked, taking the box and pointing to the bottle on the table. He poured 2 glasses full and handed one to the priest. "That's about what I had in mind, but I still owe you an explanation of what happened out there." He scowled into his glass for a second, then raised it to the other man. "It's a big universe, and I guess we have to make out as best we can. Here's to sanity." "God be with you," Father Mark said, and raised his glass as well. "Not with me, or with this planet," Garth said firmly, "and that's the crux of the matter." He half-drained his glass and sighed. "Do you say that to shock me?" the priest asked with a smile. "I assure you it doesn't." "Not intended to shock. I meant it quite literally. I suppose I'm what you would call an atheist, so revealed religion is not concern of mine. while these natives, simple and unlettered Stone Age types that they are, have managed to come this far with no superstitions or traces of deism whatsoever. I had hoped that they might continue that way." "What are you saying?" the priest asked. "Do you mean that they have no gods, no belief in the hereafter? They must die." "Die they do, and to the dust return like the rest of the animals. They have thunder, trees, and water without having thunder gods, tree spirits, and water nymphs. They have no ugly little gods, taboos, spells to hag, ride, and limit their lives. They are the only primitive people that I've ever encountered that are completely free of superstition and appear to be much happier and sane because of it. I wanted to keep them that way." "You wanted to keep them from God, from salvation?" The priest's eyes widened as he recoiled slightly. "No," God said. "I wanted to keep them from superstition until they knew more and could think about it realistically, without being absorbed and perhaps destroyed by it." "You're being insulting to the church, sir. To equate it to superstition." "Please," God said, raising his hand. "No theological arguments. I don't think your society footed the bill for the trip to just attempt a conversion on me. Just accept the fact that my beliefs have been arrived at through careful thought over a period of years, and no amount of undergraduate metaphysics will change them. I promise not to try and convert you if you will do the same to me." "Agreed, Mr. Garth. As you have reminded me, my mission here is to save these souls, and that is what I must do. But why would my work disturb you so much that you would try and keep me from landing, even to threaten me with your gun and—" The priest broke off and looked into the glass. "You and even slug you?" Garth asked, suddenly frowning. "There was no excuse for that, and I would like to say that I am sorry. Plain bad manners and an even worse temper. Live long enough and you find yourself doing this kind of thing." He brooded down at his big hands, where they lay on the table, reading memories into the scars and calluses patterned there. "Let's just call it frustration for lack of a better word. In your business, you must have had a lot of chance to peep into the darker places in men's minds, and you should know a bit about the motives and happiness. I have too busy a life to ever consider settling down and raising a family, and right up until recently, I never missed it. Maybe leakage radiation is softening up my brain, but I had begun to think of these furry and fishy Weskers as being a little like my children, that I was somehow responsible for them." There we go. Glad it was the camera and not my eyes. "We are all his children," Father Mark said quietly. "Well, here are some of his children that can't even imagine his existence," Garth said, suddenly angry at himself for allowing gentler emotions to show through. Yet he forgot himself at once, leaning forward with an intensity of his feelings. "Can't you realize the importance of this? Live with these Weskers for a while and you'll discover a simple and happy life that matches the state of grace you people are always talking about. They get pleasure from their lives and cause no pain. By circumstances, they have evolved on an almost barren world, so have never had the chance to grow out of a physical Stone Age culture. But mentally, they are our match, or perhaps better. They have all learned my language, so I can easily explain the many things they want to know. Knowledge and gaining knowledge gives them real satisfaction. They tend to be exasperating at times because every new fact must be related to the structure of all other things. But the more they learn, the faster this process becomes. Someday they are going to be man's equal in every way, perhaps surpass us. Would you do me a favor? Whatever I can, leave them alone, or teach them, if you must, history and science, philosophy, law, anything that'll help them face the realities of the greater universe they've never seen or never even knew existed before. But don't confuse them with your hatreds and pain, guilt, sin, and punishment. Who knows the harm? You are being insulting, sir, the priest said, jumping to his feet. The top of his grey head barely come to the massive spaceman's chin. Yet he showed no fear in defending what he believed. Garth, standing now himself, was no longer the penitent. They faced each other in anger, as the man always stood, unbending in the defense of what they thought was right. Yours is the insult, Garth shouted, the incredible egotism to feel that your derivative little mythology, differing only slightly from the thousands of others that still burden man, can do anything but confuse their still fresh minds. Don't you realize that they believe in truth and have never heard of such a thing as a lie? They have not been trained yet to understand that other kinds of minds can think differently from theirs. Will you spare them this? I will do my duty with his quill, Mr. Garth. These are God's creatures here, and they have souls. I cannot shirk my duty, which is to bring him his word, so that they may be saved and enter into the kingdom of heaven. When the priest opened the door and the wind caught it and blew it wide, he vanished into the storm-swept darkness, and the door swung back and forth, and a splatter of raindrops blew in. Garth's boots, muddy footprints were his one. Garth's boots left muddy footprints when he closed the door, shutting out the sight of the Itin sitting patiently at the uncomplaining in the storm, hoping only that Garth might stop for a moment and leave with him some of the wonderful knowledge which he had so much of. By unspoken consent, that first night was never mentioned again. After a few days of loneliness, made worse because each knew of the other's proximity, they found themselves talking on carefully neutral grounds. Garth slowly packed and stowed away his stock and never admitted that his work had finished and he would leave at any time. He had a fair amount of interesting drugs and botanicals that would fetch a good price, and the Wesker artifacts were to create a sensation in the sophisticated galactic market. Crafts on the planet had been limited before his arrival, mostly pieces of carving painfully chipped into the hard wood of the fragmented stone. He had supplied tools and a stock of raw metal from his own supplies, nothing more than that. In a few months the Weskers had not only learned to work with the new materials, but had translated their own designs and forms into the most alien but most beautiful artifacts that he had ever seen. All he had to do was release these on the market to create a primary demand, then return for a new supply. The Weskers wanted only books and tools and knowledge in return, and through their own efforts he knew they would pull themselves into the Galactic Union. This is what Garth had hoped, but a wind of change was blowing through the settlement that had grown up around his ship. No longer was the center of attention, of the focal point of the village life. He had to grin when he thought of his fall from power, yet there was very little humor in his smile. Serious and attentive Weskers still took turns of duty as knowledge collectors, but their recording of the dry facts was in sharp contrast to the intellectual hurricane that surrounded the priest. Where Garth had made them work for each book and machine, the priest gave freely. Garth had tried to be progressive in his supply of knowledge, treating them as bright but unlettered children. He had wanted them to walk before they could run, to master one step before they could go on to the next. Father Mark simply brought them the benefits of Christianity. The only physical work he required was the construction of a church, a place of worship and learning. More Weskers had appeared out of the limitless penetrity of the swamps, and within days the roof was up, supported on a framework of poles. Each morning the congregation worked a little while on the walls, then hurried inside to learn the all-promising, all-encompassing, all-important facts about the universe. Garth never told the Weskers what he thought about their new interest, and this was mainly because they had never asked. Pride or honor stood in the way of his grabbing. Pride or honor stood in the way of his grabbing a willing listener and pouring out his grievances. Perhaps it would have been different if the Iton was collecting duty. He was the brightest of the lot, but Iton had been rotated the day after the priest had arrived, and Garth had not talked to him since. It was a surprise then when, after 17 of the terribly lonely Wesker days, he found a delegation at his doorstep when he emerged after breakfast. Iton was their spokesman, and his mouth was open slightly. Many of the other Weskers had their mouths open as well, one even appearing to be yawning, clearly revealing the double row of sharp teeth and the purple-black throat. The mouths impressed Garth as to the seriousness of the meeting. This was the one Wesker expression that had learned to recognize. An open mouth indicated some strong emotion, happiness, sadness, anger. He could never really be sure which. The Weskers were normally placid and had never seen enough open mouths to tell what was causing them, but he was surrounded by them now. "Will you help us, John Garth?" Iton said. "We have a question." "I'll answer any question you ask," Garth said, with more than a hint of misgiving. "What is it?" "Is there a God?" "What do you mean by God?" Garth asked him in turn. What should he tell them? "God is our Father in heaven, who made us all and protects us, whom we pray to for aid, and if we are saved, we'll find a place." "That's enough," Garth said. "There is no God." All of them had their mouths open now, even Iton, as they looked at Garth and thought about his answer. The rows of pink teeth would have been frightening if he hadn't known these creatures so well. For one instant, he wondered if perhaps they had been already indoctrinated and looked upon him as a heretic. But he brushed that thought away. "Thank you," Iton said, and they turned and left. Though the morning was still cool, Garth noticed that he was sweating and wondering why. The reaction was not long in coming. Iton returned that same afternoon. "Will you come to the church?" he asked. "Many of the things that we study are difficult to learn, but none as difficult as this. We need your help, because we must hear you and Father Mark talk together. This is because he says one thing is true, and you say another is true, and both cannot be true at the same time. We cannot find out what's true." "I'll come, of course," Garth said, trying to hide a sudden feeling of elation. He had done nothing, but the Weskers had come to him anyway. There could still be grounds for hope that they might yet be free. It was hot inside the church, and Garth was surprised at the number of Weskers who were there, more than he had seen gathered at any one time before. There were many open mouths. Father Mark sat at the table, covered with books. He looked unhappy, but didn't say anything when Garth came in. Garth spoke first. "I hope you realize this is their idea. They say that they came to me of their own free will and asked me to come here." "I know that," the priest said resignedly. "At times they can be very difficult, but they are learning and want to believe, and that is what is important." "Father Mark, Trader Garth, we need your help," Iton said. "You both know many things that we do not know. You must help us come to religion, which is not an easy thing to do." Garth started to say something, then changed his mind. Iton went on. "We have read the Bibles of all the books that Father Mark gave us, and one thing is clear. We have discussed this, and we are all agreed. These books are very different from the ones that Trader Garth gave us. In Trader Garth's books there is a universe which we have not seen, and it goes on without God, for he is mentioned nowhere. We have searched very carefully. In Father Mark's books he is everywhere, and nothing can go without him. One of these must be right, and the other must be wrong. We do not know how this can be, but after we find out which is right, then perhaps we will know. If God does not exist." Of course he exists, my children, Father Mark said in a voice of heartfelt intensity. He is our Father in heaven, who has created us all. Who created God? Iton asked, and the murmur ceased, and every one of the Weskers watched Father Mark intensely. He recoiled a bit under the impact of their eyes, then smiled. Nothing created God, since he is the creator. He always was. If he always was in existence, why cannot the universe have always been in existence, without having had a creator? Iton broke in with a rush of words. The importance of the question was obvious. The priest answered slowly with infinite patience. Would that the answers were that simple, my children. But even the scientists do not agree about the creation of the universe. While they doubt, we who have seen the light know. We can see the miracle of creation all around us, and how can there be a creation without a creator? That is he, our Father, our God in heaven. I know you have doubts. That is because you have souls and free will. Still, the answer is so simple. Have faith that it is all you need. Just believe. How can we believe without proof? If you cannot see that this world itself is proof of his existence, then I say to you that belief needs no proof. It is you have faith. A bubble of voices arose in the room, and more of the Wesker mouths were open now as they tried to force their thoughts through the tangled skein of words and separate the thread of truth. Can you tell us, Garth? Iton asked, and the sound of his voice quieted the hubbub. I can tell you to use a scientific method which can examine all things, including itself, and give you answers that can prove the truth or falsify any statement. That is what we must do, Iton said. We had reached the same conclusion. He held a thick book before him, and a ripple of nods ran across the watchers. We have been studying this Bible that Father Mark told us to do, and we have found the answer. God will make a miracle for us, thereby proving that he is watching us, and by this sign we will know him and go to him. That is the sin of false pride, Father Mark said. God needs no miracles to prove his existence, but we need the miracle, Iton shouted. And though he wasn't human, there was a need in his voice. We have need here of many smaller miracles, leaves, fishes, wine, snakes, many of them, for much smaller reasons. Now, all he needs to do is make a miracle, and he will bring us all to him. He, the wonder of the entire new world worshipping his throne, as you have told us, Father Mark, and you have told us how important this is. We have discussed this and find that there is only one miracle that is best for this kind of thing. His boredom at the theological wrangling drained from Garth in an instant. He had not been really thinking, or we would have realized that there was where all this was leading. He could see the illustration in the Bible where Iton held it open, and knew in evidence what the picture was. He rose slowly from the chair, as if stretching, and turned to the priest behind him. Get ready, he whispered. Get out the back and get to the ship. I'll keep them busy here. I don't think they'll harm me. What do you mean? Father Mark asked, blinking in surprise. Get out, you fool! Garth hissed. What miracle do you think they mean? What miracle is supposed to have converted the world to Christianity? No, Father Mark said. It cannot be. It just cannot be. Get moving! Garth shouted, dragging the priest from the chair and hurling him towards the rear wall. Father Mark stumbled to a halt, turned back. Garth leapt for him, but it was already too late. The amphibians were small, but there was a many of them. Garth lashed out as he first struck Iton, hurling him back into the crowd. The others came on as he fought his way towards the priest. But he beat at them, but it was like struggling against waves. The furry, musky bodies washed over the engulfed him. He fought until they tied him, and he still struggled until they beat his head until he stopped. Then they pulled him outside where he could only lie in the rain and curse and watch. Of course, the Weskers were marvelous craftsmen, and everything had been constructed down to the last detail, following the illustration in the Bible. There was a cross planted firmly in the top of the small hill, the gleaming metal spikes, the hammer. Father Mark was stripped and draped into a carefully plaited loincloth. They led him out to the church. At the sight of the cross, he almost fainted. After that, he held his head high and determined to die as he had lived, with faith. Yet this was hard. It was unbearable for Garth, who only watched. It was one thing to talk about crucifixion and look at the gentle carved bodies in the dim light of prayers. It is another to see a man naked, ropes cutting into his skin where he hangs from a bar of wood, and to see the needle-tipped spikes raised and pierced against the soft flesh of his palm. To see the hammer come back with the calm deliberation of an artisan measured stroke. To hear the thick sound of metal pounding or penetrating flesh. Then to hear the screams. Few are born to be martyrs. Father Mark was not one of them. With the first blows, the blood ran from his lips where his clenched teeth met. Then his mouth was wide, and his head strained back as the guttural horror of his screams sliced through the serration of the falling rain. It resounded as a silent echo from the masses of watching Weskers, for whatever emotion opened their mouths was now tearing at their bodies with all of its force, and row after row of gaping jaws reflected the crucified priest's agony. Mercifully, he fainted as the last nail was driven home. Blood ran from the raw wounds, mixing with the rain to drip faintly pink from his feet as the life ran out of him. Sobbing and tearing at his own bonds, numbed from the blows to the head, Garth lost consciousness. He awoke in his own warehouse, and it was dark. Someone was crafting away at the woven ropes that they bound him with. The rain still dripped and splashed outside. "Aiton," he said. He could hear it could be no one else. "Yes," the alien voice whispered back. "The others are all talking in the church. Lynn died after you struck his head, and Einon is very sick. There are some that say that you should be crucified too. I think that is what will happen, or perhaps killed by stoning on the head. They have found in the Bible where it says, 'I know,' with infinite weariness, 'an eye for an eye.' You'll find lots of things like that one in that Buisha. An eye for an eye. You'll find lots of things like that once you start looking. It's a wonderful book." His head ached terribly. "You must go. You can get to your ship without anyone seeing you. There has been enough killing." Aiton, as well, spoke with a new-found wariness. Garth experimented, putting himself to his feet. He pressed his head to the wood of the wall until the nausea stopped. "He's dead," he said, as an statement, not a question. "Yes, some time ago, or I could not have come away to see you." "And buried, of course, or they wouldn't be thinking about starting on me next." "And buried?" There was an almost ring of emotion in the alien's voice, an echo of the dead priests. "He is buried, and he will rise up high. It is written, and that is the way it will be. Father Mark will be so happy that it has happened like this." The voice ended in the sound of a human sob. Garth painfully worked his way towards the door, leaning against the wall so that he wouldn't fall. "And we did the right thing, didn't we?" Aiton asked. There was no answer. "He will rise up, Garth. Won't he rise?" Garth was at the door, and enough light came in from the brightly lit church to show the torn and bloody hands clutching at the frame. Aiton's face swam into sight close to his, and Garth felt the delicate, many-fingered hands with the sharp nails catch his clothes. "He will rise, won't he, Garth?" "No," Garth said. "He is going to stay buried right where you put him. Nothing It's going to happen when he's dead, and he's going to stay dead. The rain runneled through Iton's fur, and his mouth was open so wide that he seemed to be screaming into the night. Only with effort could he talk, squeezing out the alien's thoughts in an alien language. Then we will not be saved. We will not become pure. You were pure, Darth said, in a voice somewhere between a sob and a laugh. That's the horrible, ugly, dirty part of it. You were pure. Now you are murderers, Iton said, and the water ran down from his lowered head and streamed away into the darkness. Right, that's the first story. Some of these pages are falling out. That's not good. Eey. We'll do another one some other time. Well, probably tomorrow. Hope you guys enjoyed. Yeah. Tales from the Load Shedding is finished. Cheers.